The sky tore open like a wound. First came the silence. The kind of silence that presses against your chest, that makes your heart beat louder just so you know you're still alive. Then came the shadow. A colossal shape moving against the stars, blotting out the light as though night itself had come early. It was her ship. Everyone in the Allied capital had heard stories about it. The black fortress that drifted like a grave in space. The ship that moved without engines, that whispered across the void as though alive. Children in every world were told tales of it. Warnings, bedtime horrors, campfire whispers. The ship of the vampire queen. The destroyer of suns. The drinker of life. Now it was real. The great defense fleets that circled the Allied capital had not fired a shot. Some had fled the moment her shadow fell across them. Others had shut down their weapons and simply drifted, terrified to resist. No commander dared give an order. No pilot dared press the trigger. It was not because their guns were useless, though they probably were. It was because everyone already knew the truth. Resistance only meant death. Her name was Xeris, and she was older than memory, older than the very wars that had forged the Alliance. Entire civilizations had died under her hand. Some worlds had been drained until their oceans were dust and their skies empty. Others had surrendered before a single blade was drawn. There was no need to fight her. The terror she carried was sharper than any weapon. When her ship descended, the clouds bent as though kneeling. Lightning crackled along the edges of the sky. People below covered their heads and prayed to gods who had never answered them before. The capital itself, once a proud monument of steel towers and shining domes, felt suddenly small, fragile, like a toy city that could be crushed by the first careless step. And then she appeared. The throne descended slowly from the ship's underbelly, a floating dais of black stone and metal that pulsed with a faint red glow. It was not just a throne. It was alive, humming, whispering, feeding from the fear it touched. Chains of light coiled around it like serpents, and upon it sat the queen herself. Xeris was beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful, a kind of beauty that terrifies even as it holds your eyes. Her skin was pale, almost silver, stretched like silk over a figure both graceful and cruel. Her eyes glowed faint gold, deep and endless like suns reflected in dark water. Her smile was sharp, too sharp, a promise of pain and hunger. Her cloak was woven from something not of this universe, blacker than space, trailing smoke that seemed to eat the air around it. No one spoke when she arrived. No one moved. The entire square, generals, soldiers, citizens, leaders of 100 worlds, froze as if carved from stone. Even the banners hanging high above the plaza seemed to hang lower, weaker, as though bowing too. One by one, they fell to their knees. A ripple of surrender spread through the crowd. It was not commanded. It was instinct, like prey before a predator. They could not help themselves. Their heads bent low. Their hearts pounded. Some wept. Some whispered prayers. She had not yet spoken a single word. And yet the silence was heavier than war drums. They all knew what was coming. They had heard the same stories. Entire fleets drained of life. Armies left as nothing more than husks drifting, in empty armor. She did not always fight. She did not always destroy. But when she did, the aftermath was always the same. Silence and ashes. Every man, woman, and child who looked upon her throne felt the same thing. This was not someone you fought. This was not someone you defied. This was an ending wearing the mask of a queen. And so they trembled. And so they bowed. And so the greatest worlds of the Alliance bent their heads like cattle before slaughter. Everyone, except one man. His name was Daniel Holt. In a sea of bowed heads, Daniel was the only one left standing. To anyone watching, it almost looked like a mistake. Maybe he hadn't noticed. Maybe he was frozen with shock. But no. Daniel knew exactly what he was doing. His back was stiff, his jaw tight, and his eyes, though trembling, refused to drop to the ground. Daniel was not a general. He was not a warrior. He had no polished armor, no medals, no banners. He wasn't chosen by destiny, wasn't blessed by any god. He was just a human, a cargo officer from a backwater colony who had come to the capital to deliver freight. When the Queen's fleet descended, he had been trapped here, unable to escape with the last transports. By all logic, Daniel should have been cowering with the rest. But fear alone had brought him here. Fear and anger. He thought of his home, burned 2 years ago by raiders who claimed to serve the Queen. He thought of his brother, who had stood with a rifle in his hands only to be found later as nothing more than a husk, skin gray and eyes empty. He thought of his sister who had whispered to him before the end, "Don't let them take everything from us." Daniel had never been brave. He had never been strong. But standing in that square, watching generals bow like frightened children, something inside him cracked. Something inside him screamed, "If no one stands, we're already dead." Around him, soldiers and citizens pressed lower to the ground. Some reached out as if to pull him down too, terrified that his stubbornness would bring the Queen's wrath upon them all. One woman whispered through her teeth, "Please, for the love of stars, kneel. She'll kill us." But Daniel shook his head, never taking his eyes off the throne above. No. The word came out rough, broken, almost too soft to hear. But to him, it carried the weight of everything he had lost. He remembered his father's words when he was a boy. "There are 2 ways to die, son, on your knees or on your feet. Only one lets you leave a shadow." And Daniel chose. The Queen noticed him. Of course she did. How could she not? In a crowd of thousands, every one of them folded like paper, he stood alone, a single flaw in her, perfect wall of submission. Her golden eyes turned toward him, slow and deliberate, like a predator fixing on prey. Daniel felt his throat close. His skin crawled as though ice water was poured down his back. Every instinct screamed at him to look away, to bow, to vanish, but he locked his knees and clenched his fists until his nails dug into his palms. Her gaze burned like a sun. "You," she whispered, though the word carried across the entire square. It slithered into every ear, vibrating in every bone. "Why? Do you stand?" Daniel wanted to answer, but his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He thought he might collapse right there, choking on his own fear. But then he thought of his brother's hollow eyes, his sister's last words, his father's old lesson, so he forced sound through his throat. His voice cracked, but it carried. "Because I don't fear you." The square gasped as one. The words struck like lightning. No one, not in living memory, had dared say such a thing to her. The vampire queen who drained suns, who shattered fleets, who carried fear like a weapon. No one had spoken against her and lived. The Queen's lips curved slowly into a smile. Not one of kindness, one of interest. The kind a hunter wears when prey does something unexpected. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. Daniel's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. He nodded once. "You're a monster." A wave of panic surged through the crowd. Some covered their mouths. Some groaned in despair. Many pressed their heads deeper into the ground as though hoping to sink into the earth and escape the wrath they were sure was coming. The Queen tilted her head, amused. She rose from her throne, her cloak whispering like smoke, and began to descend step by step. Each footfall echoed like thunder. The closer she came, the heavier the air grew, pressing down on Daniel's chest. But he did not kneel. He could barely breathe. His legs shook, his vision blurred, but he stayed upright. Because, in that moment, Daniel realized something powerful, something so simple it nearly broke him. If he bowed, if he gave in like the rest, then humanity truly was nothing. Just another herd of cattle waiting for the slaughter. But if he stood, if he kept standing, then maybe, just maybe, there was hope left, even if it was only a spark. The world seemed to hold its breath. Every pair of eyes in the grand square turned toward him, toward the one human who had not bowed. Soldiers, leaders, citizens, even the alien delegates from other worlds, all frozen in disbelief. It was madness. To stand before the alien vampire queen, to defy her with words that tasted like fire and death, was something no one had ever dared. Her golden gaze locked onto Daniel, burning into him like the weight of a sun. The glow from her eyes seemed alive, reaching into the cracks of his mind, tugging at every instinct that screamed submit, surrender, kneel. Daniel's chest rose and fell in sharp, painful breaths. His body was betraying him. Sweat ran down. His spine, his knees wobbled, his heart hammered so violently he thought it might explode. But his spirit clung to one truth. If he gave in now, everything he had stood for would vanish. His family's memory, his people's pride, his very humanity, would be lost in the dust, so he held her gaze. The queen moved closer. Her steps made no sound, but the air rippled with each motion, bending, twisting like reality itself was nervous around her. Her cloak dragged behind her like living shadow, stretching across the stone plaza, swallowing light as it went. She stopped only a breath away. Her presence was overwhelming. Daniel felt like a mouse staring into the eyes of a vast serpent. Her voice broke the silence, low and sharp as a blade. "You dare remain upright?" she whispered, though her words carried like thunder. The crowd flinched as one. Some moaned, expecting death to follow. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry as sand. His lips trembled, but he forced the words out, one shaky syllable at a time. "Yes." The queen tilted her head. Amusement flickered across her pale, perfect features. Her smile widened, revealing teeth too sharp, too cruel to belong to anything human. "You do not fear me?" she asked, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Do you not know what I am?" Daniel's voice cracked, but he answered anyway. "I know enough." Her smile thinned. The air around them grew colder, heavy as iron chains. The torches lining the plaza flickered weakly, struggling against the weight of her power. The stars above seemed to dim, as if even the heavens dared not shine in her presence. "No one has ever stood against me and lived," she said. Her voice was silk over knives, promising agony with every word. "Not kings, not generals, not armies. And yet you, a fragile human without armor, without rank, without name, you stand." Daniel's hands trembled, but he clenched them into fists. His answer came out raw, scraping his throat. "Someone has to." The crowd gasped again. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Soldiers pressed their faces deeper into the ground. One man even whispered, broken and horrified, "He's going to doom us all." But Daniel did not stop. He took a shaky breath and said louder, his voice cracking but steady in meaning. "You can kill me. You can kill us all. But I won't kneel, not to you." The queen's eyes narrowed. The golden fire within them swirled, sharp and wild. For a moment it seemed she might tear him apart where he stood. Her talons twitched, glowing faint red, hunger burning in them. And yet, something unexpected flickered across her face. Not rage, not hunger, something else. Curiosity. She leaned, closer until her cold breath touched his cheek. "Do you not understand?" she whispered. "I could drain the fire from your veins in one breath. I could strip your soul until nothing remains but ash and silence." Daniel's jaw tightened. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the square like a blade. "Then do it." The words hung heavy in the air. The queen froze. Around them the crowd shivered in terror. A single word from her could have ended him. She had ended countless others for far less. And yet there he stood, daring her to strike, daring her to prove her power. His next words, though whispered, struck harder than any weapon. "But you'll never have my fear." The square fell into silence. No one dared breathe. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Every eye turned between the fragile human and the eternal queen, waiting for death to fall. For the first time in centuries, the alien vampire queen did not smile. For the first time, her gaze faltered. The queen descended fully from her throne. Every step she took seemed to pull the light out of the world. The ground beneath her feet cracked like it could no longer bear her weight. Shadows spread out in ripples, reaching for Daniel like living hands. The crowd pressed flatter to the stone, trembling, whispering prayers to gods who could not hear them. But Daniel stayed on his feet. His chest burned with fear. His lungs felt crushed as though the very air around her was poison. His legs shook so violently he thought they would give out. Yet still he stood. He told himself again and again, "Don't kneel, don't give her what she wants." The queen stopped only inches away from him. She was taller up close, towering, her cloak spilling around her like black fire. Her golden eyes studied him with cold precision, as if he were some puzzle she could not solve. She lifted her hand. Her fingers were long, tipped with curved claws that glowed faint red, the color of dying embers. The glow pulsed with hunger, with the promise of pain. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but each word sliced like a knife. "Do you not understand, human? I could tear the life from you in one breath. Your body would fall and your soul would scatter into the void. Nothing of you would remain. That is my gift. That is my curse." The crowd whimpered. Some turned their faces away, not able to watch what was surely about to happen. Many expected to hear Daniel's scream followed by silence. But Daniel did not scream. He did not kneel. He forced himself to meet her burning gaze and whispered, his voice shaking but unbroken, "Then do it." The queen blinked. Her claws hovered a finger's width from his chest. The red glow brightened, casting shadows across his face, but she did not strike. Something in her golden eyes flickered. Daniel's throat was dry. Every instinct in his body begged him to shut up, to beg for mercy, to run. But something stronger pushed him forward. Anger, grief, defiance. "You want my fear," he rasped, almost choking on his own words. "But you'll never have it, not from me." The silence that followed was unbearable. The plaza seemed frozen in time. Even the torches stopped flickering as though the air itself waited for her judgment. The queen tilted her head slowly, her eyes narrowing, her hand lowered, though only slightly. She studied him like one might study a strange animal, a creature that should not exist. Her lips parted not with rage but with something else, something almost like confusion. For centuries, fear had been her weapon. Entire worlds had given up their lives without her lifting a hand. Kings had fallen at her feet, generals had begged for mercy, armies had fled before her shadow. But this human, this fragile, trembling, ordinary human, refused her, and she did not know why. Daniel's body screamed at him to collapse, but he locked his knees. His fists shook at his sides. He spoke again, louder this time, his voice cracking but clear. "You can kill me, but I won't kneel." Words hit her like stones against glass. The crowd gasped once more, louder than before. Soldiers lifted their heads just enough to see. Children peeked from their mothers' arms, wide-eyed. Even the alien delegates from distant worlds who had never dared to raise their gaze in her presence now stared openly. They were seeing the unthinkable, a man standing unbroken beneath the vampire queen's hand. Her claws withdrew, curling, slowly against her palm. Her cloak swirled around her like smoke, restless, alive. She took one step back, not out of fear, but out of hesitation. The air lightened, only slightly. The crushing weight on the plaza eased by a fraction. People blinked, realizing they could breathe again. Daniel's heart still pounded, his skin still pale, but he kept his head high. Even as his body shook, even as tears welled in his eyes, he refused to bow. And for the first time in centuries, the alien vampire queen faltered. She had meant to crush him, to strip his soul bare and leave him nothing but a husk. But something in him stood beyond her reach. Something she could not drink. Something she could not kill. His will. And in that moment, though Daniel did not know it yet, the impossible had begun hope. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The queen's talons hovered an inch from Daniel's chest, glowing red with the promise of death. The crowd waited, trembling, bracing for his body to collapse into lifeless ash. But the strike never came. Instead, the queen hesitated. It was so small, so brief, that many almost missed it. A flicker in her golden eyes, a pause in her breath, a tiny, unthinkable crack in the mask of a being who had never faltered. Daniel saw it, and though fear still tore at him, a thin spark of courage lit in his chest. His body wanted to run, to kneel, to vanish, but that spark whispered louder. She is not perfect. She can bleed. She can break. The crowd began to stir. It was subtle at first. A few soldiers dared to lift their eyes, a few citizens raised their heads. Whispers slid through the silence like wind through dry grass. Why hasn't she killed him? She always kills them. She waits. Why does she wait? For the first time in living memory, people saw something other than a predator in her towering shadow. They saw hesitation. The queen stepped back slowly, her claws lowering to her side, her golden eyes narrowed, not with fury, but with thought. She studied Daniel like a riddle carved into stone. "This is strange," she murmured, her voice low, almost to herself. "No one stands. Not kings. Not armies. Not even gods. And yet you—" Her voice trailed off. The crowd trembled. The sound of her uncertainty was more terrifying than her threats, because it was new. It was wrong. It was different. Daniel's breath shook, but he forced words through his tight throat. "I told you," he said softly. "You'll never have my fear." The queen's lips tightened. Her golden eyes flashed, brighter for a moment, but then dimmed again. She should have torn him apart where he stood. She should have silenced him, broken him, drained him, ended him like she had done to countless others. But she did not. Inside her chest, something stirred. Something she had not felt in centuries. A memory of long-forgotten days when she had once been challenged, truly challenged. Not by fleets or armies, but by will. She hated it. She needed it. And for the first time, she was not certain which was stronger. Daniel's legs wobbled. His lungs screamed for air. His hands shook so badly he pressed them against his sides to hide it. But he stayed on his feet, and he realized, in the silence that followed, that he was not standing just for himself anymore. The whispers behind him had grown louder. People were watching. People were hoping. If he fell now, if he broke, they would collapse with him. But if he kept standing, if he could outlast her glare for even one more heartbeat, then maybe they would find the strength to stand too. So he locked his knees tighter and said nothing more. Silence became his weapon. The queen's expression shifted again. Confusion, then frustration, then something that looked almost like fear. Not fear of him, not of his fragile body, but of what his defiance represented. She turned her eyes toward the crowd. Thousands of faces watched her, waiting, trembling, but no longer completely broken. She felt it, the faint spark she had tried to crush flickering in their chests. A spark that had not been there before this one human stood against her. That realization stung her like fire. Her empire was built on one truth, that none could resist her. That fear was stronger than steel, that surrender was natural. But now one man had torn a hole in that truth. A small hole, yes, but even the smallest crack could spread until the whole wall collapsed. Daniel spoke again, his voice steady despite the tremor in his body. "You can kill me if you want," he said, "but I won't kneel. Not today, not ever." The words echoed across the plaza like a bell. The queen's talons curled into fists. Her cloak swirled violently, as though alive with anger. She wanted to strike him, to silence him forever. But she couldn't. Something deep inside stopped her, something ancient and terrible that whispered, "If you break him, you will only prove him right." So she turned away. Gasps rippled through the square. She had retreated. Even a single step, even for a single breath, was unthinkable. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the alien vampire queen was not the only one who carried power in the room. The crowd saw it. Daniel felt it. And the crack widened. Daniel's whole body trembled. His breath came in ragged pulls, his chest burning like fire. Sweat dripped down his brow, stinging his eyes. Every part of him wanted to collapse, to give in, to let the weight of her presence crush him into the ground. But he didn't. He stood, even if it was only because his stubbornness had grown heavier than his fear. The queen still hovered close, her golden eyes burning into him. Her cloak whipped around her ankles as if the air itself bent to her fury. Her claws flexed and curled, hungry, restless, aching to tear. She had broken empires with less, and yet she held back. The crowd saw it, and that was when everything began to change. "Kill me if you want," Daniel said, his voice rough but clear. His throat hurt, but he forced the words out. "But you'll never make me kneel." The sound echoed through the plaza. The words were not loud, but they carried. They cut through fear like a blade through smoke. Every person on the ground heard them, and every heart trembled at the weight. Some soldiers looked up, blinking through their terror. Some civilians shifted on their knees, uncertain. Hope was fragile, but it was there now, a spark burning in the dark. The queen's eyes narrowed, her cloak flared, alive with black fire, but she did not strike. Instead, she stepped back. Just one step, but it was enough to shatter the silence. The people gasped. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but the alien vampire queen had retreated. Not far, not fleeing, but away. Away from him. Away from the human who would not kneel. Daniel swayed, almost dizzy with relief, but he stayed upright. He could barely feel his legs. His hands were numb. His heart still thundered like a drum of war. But he held his ground, because he knew something now, something more powerful than weapons or armies. She could not take what he would not give. She could take his life. She could take his body. But she could never take his will unless he surrendered it. And that, Daniel realized, was her weakness. The crowd stirred louder now. Whispers became words. Words became voices. "He still stands." She stepped back. "She's not unstoppable." The fear that had chained them for so long cracked. People lifted their heads just enough to see. Children peeked from behind their mother's arms. Soldiers clenched their fists against the ground, some fighting the urge to rise. Hope was not yet strong, but it was alive. The queen's face twisted, not with rage, not with hunger, but with something far rarer. Doubt. Her golden eyes shifted, unsettled. Her cloak hissed like smoke around her, restless, agitated. "You dare?" she whispered, her voice low, shaking the stones of the plaza. "You dare make me retreat?" Daniel did not answer. He was too tired, too breathless, too close to collapsing, but he didn't need to. His silence said everything. His unbroken posture screamed louder than any words, and the crowd heard it. They began to rise. Not all at once, not many, but a few. A soldier here, a citizen there. Their legs shook, their faces pale, but they rose, taking strength from the human who had stood first. The queen noticed. Her eyes widened as she watched her fear begin to slip, like water spilling from broken hands. Daniel saw the movement around him. He felt the shift, and though his chest still burned and his knees threatened to buckle, he drew in another breath and spoke once more. "You'll never have us all." The words were quiet, but they lit the spark into flame. More soldiers rose, faces grim but determined. More citizens lifted their heads, some even standing tall. The ripple spread through the square like fire racing through dry grass. The queen's cloak lashed violently, whipping the air with shadow, but the fear did not return. She could not put the fire back into darkness. She had lost her grip. For the first time in centuries, the alien vampire queen stepped away in silence. Her throne shimmered behind her, waiting. The cloak of shadow that had always seemed invincible now flickered at its edges. She turned without another word, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. And in that moment, every person in the square understood the truth. The queen was powerful. She was eternal. She was terrible, but she was not unbreakable. Daniel Holt, a cargo officer from nowhere, had shown them all, and the shift had begun. The plaza was silent except for the sound of hearts beating. The alien vampire queen stood still for one last moment, her golden eyes sweeping over the crowd. Once her gaze alone had been enough to shatter courage, enough to make entire armies kneel. But now the same eyes found something different. Faces lifted, spines straightened, voices whispering not in terror, but in defiance. And all of it, because of one human who had refused to bend. Her cloak flared in a storm of black fire, swirling like smoke caught in the wind. The throne behind her glowed, its surface alive with crimson light, waiting to carry her back to the fortress in the sky. She looked at Daniel one final time. "You are fragile," she said, her voice deep and cold, filling the square. "Your bones break, your flesh tears, your lives pass in moments. You are nothing compared to me." Daniel stood tall, though his body trembled. His throat was raw, his knees weak, but his eyes held steady. He knew he had only one answer left, and he gave it with all the strength he had. "Maybe, but we don't kneel." The words echoed through the plaza like thunder. The queen's expression hardened, but beneath it there was something else. A flicker of thought, a shadow of hesitation, a question she could not kill with her claws or silence with her power. Her empire had been built on the certainty of fear. Yet in front of her stood a man who had given none, and that terrified her. She turned away. The throne lifted, rising back toward the fortress above. The black fire of her cloak stretched out like wings, swallowing the air. And then she was gone. No blood spilled. No life drained. No bodies left hollow. Only silence. But it was not the silence of despair this time. It was the silence of awakening. One by one, people rose to their feet. Soldiers who had pressed their faces into the ground now stood tall, hands clenched in fists. Citizens who had wept in terror wiped their eyes and looked at each other amazed. The square filled with whispers that grew into words, words that grew into shouts until the air trembled not with fear, but with something greater. Stand. Stand with him. Stand for us all. And they did. Thousands rose, filling the square with a tide of bodies no longer bowed. For the first time in living memory, the vampire queen had left without her victory. For the first time, the people of the allied worlds felt that she was not invincible, because a single human had refused to kneel. Daniel swayed where he stood. His body screamed for rest, his mind was fogged with exhaustion, but he held on long, enough to see what was happening around him. People were smiling through their tears. Some laughed shakily, like children who had survived a nightmare. Others reached out, gripping the hands of strangers, holding on to the strength they felt rising in their hearts. And then they looked at him, not as a cargo officer, not as a man caught by chance in the capital, but as something more, as proof. Proof that even the greatest monster in the galaxy could be resisted. Proof that humanity's strength was not in its ships or weapons, but in its will. Proof that courage could outlast fear. Daniel wanted to tell them he was nobody, that he was afraid, that he had nearly collapsed 100 times, that he was no hero. But when he opened his mouth, no words came. His body finally gave out. His knees buckled and he fell. But before he hit the ground, hands caught him. Soldiers, citizens, strangers. They held him up as though he were carrying all of them. And in truth he was. The cheers rose louder, rolling across the capital, climbing into the night sky where the Queen's fortress still lingered in the stars. She had left, but the people were still here, and now they believed. That night, stories began to spread. Stories that crossed oceans, crossed planets, crossed entire systems.